Okay, Aaron, it's now your show.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jen and Jenna. I'm going to zip over here. There we are. Um, I'm really happy to be here with y'all today. Thanks so much for taking the time, whether it is like dinner time in around the Midwest or East Coast of the US or the middle of the night in Europe. It's really great to have people take the time to be here and gather and discuss and explore the social stories approach. I just want to thank Amanda, who I think will be joining us shortly, for helping to coordinate this, and the Great Lakes ROTA-RC. And I really want to thank Team Social Stories, who you heard about in the intro there, Carol Gray and Catherine Faraday and Siobhan Timmons. This is a pretty fabulous, smart, caring, thoughtful group of people that I've had the great pleasure of being able to join recently. And this wouldn't have been possible without them both, because I'm doing this on behalf of the team, and as well as the fact that I've learned so much in the time that I've had the opportunity to collaborate with these folks, and they happen to be joining us here today. So I'm going to do my absolute very best to represent the team's work as well as I possibly can. Um, I was a special education teacher, as you heard in my bio. I don't want to belabor who I am and sort of my part of this, but some of the context of sort of who I am and what I bring to this, I think, does matter. In that, oftentimes, special education teachers and therapists of different kinds, related service providers and schools are trained in a very particular paradigm. And though this is sort of unfair and kind of reductionist. Essentially, the way we're taught, if you really boil it down, is, hey, welcome to the world of teaching the kids who don't learn right. So let's test them a whole bunch to figure out all the things they're not good at, and then you're going to spend your time making them do the things that they're not good at so they get a little better at it. And again, that's not actually our jobs. I never saw that as my role, and I don't mean, any sort of disparaging feelings for anyone who does this work. But I do want to recognize that the field kind of operates that way. It's sort of like I said, the paradigm that we operate in. And I had the great fortune and honor, really, through my work at the NEST program, which is an inclusion program here in the New York City public schools, specifically designed for autistic students. I both taught in this program in a couple of schools here in the city, and then I got to join the team at New York University that supports this program and does professional development and training and so forth. And there are some really fabulous people who have been a part of it, who have developed it, who've been connected to it. And I've learned a great deal from them. And it's really sort of like chipped away at that paradigm that we sometimes operate in, even if we're not aware that we're operating in it. Um, for one, I got to learn from my dear friend and former boss, Dorothy Siegel, who has shared this phrase over and over again, that children are more alike than they are different, and they deserve to be educated together whenever possible. That's a little different than that paradigm, that special ed paradigm we sometimes fall into. I got to learn from the great Christy Patton, who also a former boss of mine, now counselor to the president of New York University, who shared early on in my career and connection to her that no one build their lives on remediated weaknesses. And I've gotten to hear Carol Gray present a whole lot. And she really challenges people to recognize that to do this work of supporting people who might think and perceive the world a little differently than the rest of us, than some of us, we really do have to undergo a paradigm shift. And we have to challenge this typical approach of, I know what's going on, and I'm going to teach you to do things like me. So I've really shifted to a strengths-based approach, which centers the true experts in this work, which are disabled folks and autistic folks themselves. And really, a lot of my work, instead of figuring out how, like, what do we do for this kid to support this kid who is having a problem, the starting point is really examining like the demands and the expectations and the environment and the context before jumping to see the kid as having some kind of problem. And that is the context through which I'd like to share the social stories approach. That social stories are an incredibly powerful strategy, but they really do represent a shift in some assumptions and sometimes unquestioned ways of being in education and dealing with people and children that really does kind of challenge us at times, but in a really necessary and really powerful way. It was good to see the little poll to see how many folks are familiar with social stories already and to what extent. I do want to say that this isn't a social stories training to write a social story. We have about 90 minutes together, and the full social stories training is 6 hours. It's very comprehensive. And while I hope that folks leave here knowing more than they did before, I do want to say that this isn't a sort of certificate-bearing training about social stories, and I do encourage folks to look at Carol's website and other resources that I'll share later on if people are interested in getting the full training. So I'm going to continue along the way here and share the agenda. We're going to start with a quick warm-up, and we're going to end with a wrap-up. Those are sort of our bookends. And then our three main parts we're going to explore together are taking perspective, social humility, and safety and respect. Those are the main three chapters of our time together. And I'm trying in all my work to sort of represent, concepts in multiple ways so that people can access it in a way that works best for them. So you'll see these icons that represent each of these sort of chapters throughout our time together. Also, the slides that sort of correspond will be color-coded. And then if you're just looking for one more sort of way to latch on to these ideas, even before we've totally gotten into them yet, I want to offer one more way to think about these three chapters. And that is, in taking perspective, I want you to think of the sound, And in social humility, I want you to think of the sound, oh. And in safety and respect, I want you to think of the sound, So maybe that will ground folks. Maybe that is distracting, but I hope that maybe gets people thinking about what this might be about. Oh. That's really what we're going to be exploring today together. The learning objectives are there already for you. I'll share in just a second how you can access the slides sort of live if you'd like. We're going to do that in just a second. But I do want to mention that before we dive in here, as with any presentation that's not like in a classroom, right? Like if you're a teacher in a classroom, you know your students, you know them inside and out, you know them as learners and as people, and you base what you do on what you know about your kids. And presentations like this put us at a bit of a disadvantage because I don't know y'all. I know some of y'all. I know many of y'all, which is great, and I'm happy you're here. And I'm happy you're all here, but I don't know you, and I don't know what you know about this work, what your context you're working in, and all those kinds of things. So I've had to make some assumptions about what you know in planning this event. And when I talk to teachers, even when you talk to kids about this, learning only happens when you connect the new to the known. And everyone here is entering with some known. It will look different person to person. Your context for social stories, your experience working with autistic students or young people or any kind of people in your life might vary, but everyone has some kind of known that's your foundation. And my hope is that what you get out of this is, one, that you will recognize and connect things that you already know and do. Just have some sort of like confirmation or affirmation about the work you're already doing. Two, that you'll discover some new things you didn't know before, and you'll sort of expand and build and sort of strengthen your schema of this work. And three, I hope that you leave with a deeper understanding of what it means to be a part of the sort of social equation of working with and alongside and in support of autistic folks. And really feel better equipped to be a real support to people that you care about in your lives. Um, so I know I'm spending a lot of time on the agenda. I just want to make it really clear as we launch in here what this work is about, what we're going to do. Um, Making things clear and predictable is a good practice for all humans, and it's a really critical practice when you are working in support of autistic folks. And so I'm sharing an agenda just to ground us in our next, little time we have here together. But though this isn't a workshop about social support, visual supports and visual schedules, it's an important takeaway that by making this time more predictable and sharing a little framing about what we're going to do and how we're going to engage with each other, that it will be less overwhelming, maybe less scary, less intimidating, and a little bit more, you'll feel a little bit more prepared to do this work together. So yeah, with that, let's continue. You might have noticed, and Jen, when we got on the Zoom together, she's like, this doesn't look like it's supposed to look. And that's because I'm not sharing Google Slides or PowerPoint. I'm sharing slides that are made on a platform called Mural. And so I just wanted to introduce people to this briefly because it will have some implications for like how we engage together. Mural, we're all used to online webinars at this point. I imagine we are. The world has sort of created the conditions that have necessitated us to become familiar with online webinars. And I imagine, again, I'm making an assumption, but I imagine folks have had some experience being on webinars. Just imagine that's the case by this time, 4 years in. And this will be similar to those that you've probably been a part of, where like someone shares their screen and you kind of go through the slides. And you can use the Zoom chat to interact. But Mural, I use Mural intentionally because it's an interactive and sort of dynamic platform. And we're going to use it in a very intentional way. And I'll explain that shortly. But I do want to say from the outset that no one is required to or expected to participate on the Mural board. If you're not comfortable, you just don't feel like it, you kind of want to sit back and watch the screen share, that's A-okay. The intention is that Mural allows us to sort of have the option of engaging in a slightly different way in this kind of a setting than we might have otherwise. So I invite you to try it once I share how that's going to work. And I also invite you to participate as you typically would in another webinar. And so with that, I want to share this. This is what I just described to you, but in written format. And so I just want to give folks an opportunity to read what's written here, and I won't talk over you. I'll give you 2-3 minutes just to read what's in front of you. So I don't want to interrupt folks that are still finishing. People read at different rates. But for those who have finished, I just want to share that what I attempted to do is sort of write a little bit of an introduction article, offer some perspective that I just gave verbally, but have it written out for you to be able to review. And this is sort of, and I want to name that I didn't go through the full process of writing a social article that one should to make sure it's a true social article. But I attempted to offer some descriptive information, some perspective about how this might work, and give some very clear options of how people might choose to participate as a way, again, of making things a little bit more predictable and making sure you know what choices you have. Those things are really important. Make sure that you know what to expect and that you have options. So we're not going to get into it quite yet, but I've been teasing this for a while. In a little bit, I'll share how we might engage on this space. And once we do, we'll take a couple minutes and people want to try it out. Great. If you want to participate as you might be used to doing over Zoom, you're more than welcome to do that. So if you choose to participate using Mural, you might get lost. And that feels a little unnerving. And so sometimes I've done Mural with people and they love it and they're on it and they're like, now I can't see anyone. Where is everyone? I can't get back to Zoom. And so if you get lost, I will just, quickest thing to try is just go back to Zoom. If you're on Mural and you want to just get back to what we were looking at before, what you're seeing now, you just click Zoom however you can on your computer, just so you get back to that app. And sometimes it's still not in front of you, but you get this little box that has these options. You might have to click this return to meeting button, and that'll snap you back. So it should look like it looks now. Okay. So with that, let's begin the first part of our time together here officially, our warm up. And the first thing I wanted to do when we warm up is to share a note on language. I know that the ROTA-RC has a policy about using person-first language for mental and behavioral differences. It's slightly different in the world of autism. In my experience, and from what I've been exposed to and what I've learned from folks over the years, is that person with autism, that phrase, which is an example of person-first language, tends to be more favored by like families of folks and teachers and researchers. And that autistic person tends to be favored by folks who are autistic themselves. I've heard many different versions of this, but essentially, I've heard a lot of autistic people express that autism isn't something I'm like ashamed of or that feels separate from me. So I don't need to be a person with autism over here. I just am an autistic person. And so I feel I would rather you refer to me that way. Though that's also not universal. There are people with autism who prefer to be referred to as people with autism, to use person-first language. And for that reason, I sometimes sort of fluctuate and go back and forth. And I just want you to know that you might hear me say both. But I do because I want to be respectful of the community of folks that I work in service of, that in general, autistic folks tend to prefer identity-based language. There's research on this that actually shows that 87% of autistic folks prefer to be called autistic, but that does mean 13% of people with autism prefer to be called people with autism. So what is this mural thing we've been chatting about? Well, this is a space, an interactive sort of whiteboard space that allows us to kind of collaborate in real time. And we're going to do a couple of different activities. Again, you're invited to participate in this activity if you choose on Mural, or it is a sort of completely equal experience to participate using Zoom over the chat. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put a link in the chat. That link brings you to this very mural board where you're looking at right now. So you'll have access to actually be on this board, move around, and even add things to the board. So if you choose, you can follow this link. And you'll start to see at the bottom of this screen here, little icons starting to appear. These represent different people who are joining the board. There's my little cartoon face there. And here are some other people who are now joining us. If at any point you're on this board and you're like, whoa, what am I even looking at? You can always click my face and it'll snap you right over to where you are. So Visiting Sheep is now following me. That means they clicked my face and they came right over to where I am. So that's Mural. The way we're going to use Mural, or Zoom if you'd rather, is I'd love to take the temperature, so to speak, of the group. I'd love to have a quick check-in. And so the way I'd like you to respond to this check-in is to share your internal weather report. So find some, if you're on Mural, find some empty space, and you can double click anywhere like that, and it will create a little sticky note. And you can write your name and your internal weather forecast. Are you feeling like I am, partly cloudy? I know the sun's there, but it's a little obscured right now. Are you feeling a little calm before the stormy? Feel free to add that now. I'm also just going to hide cursors so we don't see everyone sort of mouse move around. But as I said, you're more than welcome to add your response in Zoom in the chat if that is more comfortable. But what is your internal weather report? How are you feeling now in weather terms? And I'm gonna oh it says view only. Just try reloading, Stacy, and see if that helps. I can try to do some things on my end if it still is a problem. Oh, and we have a very cloudy, cold person. That's okay. We can resize these. And if you want to bring that back over, I can make it smaller so we can still see other people's. There we go. We can still see other people's weather forecasts. All right, great. Cloudy and very cold. All right. We have some mostly sunny people. Light rain transitioning to sleet. Okay. I don't know if that's your actual weather report in your area or if that is your sort of internal feeling, but either way, let's be prepared for that. And some folks are playing a little bit. I see there's a little fire emoji up here. You can add things using these little icons and shapes, photos over on the side here, if that's helpful to you. And I'll just give folks another like 30 seconds. Okay. Thanks for clarifying, Zach. That's an internal weather report. Back to back. Well, I'll aim to have this be as engaging and thawing of an experience for you on a day when you've had back-to-back meetings. All right. So now some folks are in Mural and some folks are watching on Zoom, and that is terrific. You are welcome to do whatever feels comfortable. If you tried Mural and you're like, nope, and you want to go back to Zoom, feel free to do that, and you can participate in all the activities through the chat. But if you're liking this and you want to sort of play around, feel free to stay on Mural, and you'll sort of follow me as I progress through the slides. And we're doing this for a couple reasons. One is that it's helpful to just play with Mural if we're going to use it in a little bit. But the other important part here is that it's important to check in as a group and kind of see how we're feeling. Anytime you're working with someone, working to support someone who maybe is feeling vulnerable or experiencing some kind of challenge, if we are off ourselves, if we're feeling frazzled or ice stormy or very cold, it can be really hard to be able to sort of have the presence we hope to have to be able to support someone. We're going to talk a lot over the next hour or so about the idea of like being curious. And it's really hard to be curious when you're feeling off. It's sort of dysregulating to kind of, if you've had a hard day, you've had a back-to-back meeting day, and then you are put in a position to sort of help or support someone. It can be hard to sort of withhold your judgments and reactions and be truly curious in moments like that. And so I think it's just important to sort of take stock and recognize that we've got to check in with ourselves if we're going to do this sometimes tricky work of supporting people who really need some helpful perspective and guidance. So anytime you see a little box like this, a little yellow box, there'll be a little activity we'll do. And again, you can do it on Mural or you can do it in Zoom. If anyone feels compelled, feels inspired, feel free to share in the chat. How are you liking Mural? How's this landing? You gonna stick with Zoom? Again, either way is fine. But we're gonna continue on here. Again, if you're on Mural, you can click me and you'll follow me along. If you want to just be in Zoom, you're welcome to do that. Okay. Another way I would love to encourage you to get ready for this time, as we're still in warm-up mode here, is I would love folks to think of a situation. Think of a situation. Now, a situation that sort of feels connected to why you're here today. And I use the word situation intentionally because I went through a lot of other words and they didn't feel right. I don't want you to think of like a person because this isn't necessarily about the person. It's often about what's going on around the person. So yes, you can think of a student or a child, a young person, a person in your life, but this isn't just about that person. And I also didn't want you to think of a challenge because I don't want to, sort of influence how you're thinking about the situation that you are sort of wanting to think about more. It might not be a challenge. You might use a different word. It might not be something that you have any kind of, negative association with. So I want you to think of a situation that feels connected to why you're here. And I just want to tease that I'll be sharing a couple of situations that do pertain to specific people that I have worked with in my life. One is about Nick. He was a 5th grade student of mine, and we had a lot of discussion about boredom and being bored. I'm also going to talk about Charles, who was a 1st grade student I worked with, and we got into some really interesting thing about lines, lining up. And I also worked with a high school student named Oscar, and Oscar had a lot of strong stances about things. So we're going to hear a little bit about that. All 3 of the folks I mentioned are autistic, and I worked with in some kind of educational setting, either as their teacher or in a social group I ran. So I just want to think of a situation that can kind of anchor you for your time here. Thanks also for your comments to some folks are feeling Mural. Some folks are going to hang out on Zoom, which is great. All right. So that was our warm-up. Now we're going to shift into our first chapter, taking perspective. If anyone would like to, unmute and share. What's the sound we're going to try to think of or channel when we're talking about taking perspective? Thank you, Catherine. Figured I could count on you. Yeah, taking perspective is all about, okay. So taking perspective, there's this really faulty and I think damaging notion, unfortunately still to this day in the sort of field of supporting autistic folks, that claims that autistic people can't take the perspective of other people. That's just not right. And it's important to name that. There can be differences for sure, and we'll get into sort of why that is in a second. But oftentimes when you hear people talking about perspective taking with autistic folks, it's like teaching perspective taking. Like they can't do it, so I'll show them how. Which I think kind of ironically is a pretty interesting way to reveal that you're not very good at taking the perspective of the people you're talking about if you make a statement like that, right? We'll get into this more. But just to start out, again, this is a little activity where you can either do it on Mural or on Zoom if you'd prefer. But I want you to think about a conflict you've had in your life, a conflict, okay? And this isn't necessarily with the person or the situation or context you were thinking about earlier, but with a partner, a friend, a colleague, what's a conflict you've had recently? And if you look at this continuum, you might not be able to see this, but on one side it says the other person is missing information. And on this side it says, I am missing information. Under here are a bunch of little dots. And if you are on Mural, you can take a dot and you can put it anywhere on this continuum where you typically fall in a situation where you're in conflict. I'm going to take this purple dot and I'm going to put it squarely, that's being generous. I'm going to put it right there. I usually, at least when things are hot, I'm like, I know what's going on. The other person does not. They're going to hear about it. That's my default mode, as I think it may be with many people. I see a few different dots popping up in different places. If you're participating on Zoom and you want to say like where you are, like 50-50, I lean more this way, I lean more that way, you can share in the chat as well. There's an interesting range of the folks who are on Mural sharing. I think I'm the most stubborn, I guess, or the most egocentric of this crew. We're joined by some pretty empathic people, which is awesome. Um, but again, we're not talking about supporting autistic folks here. We're just talking about in our own life what often happens when we're in conflict. Do we think the other person's information and I've got to be the one to tell them what's right, or do we think, you know what, I might be missing information here, and that's at the root of this conflict? Now, if you find yourself on this left side like I do, you're not alone. It's because as humans, all kind of humans, we live inside our own heads. We are figuring things out in our own brains. And we're pretty sure that our perspective is the right perspective most of the time. That's like kind of our default mode. There's a lot we could get into about why that is evolutionarily and stuff too. But that's sort of our starting point, is that we're pretty sure we're right, and that if there's a conflict, someone else is wrong. And just to sort of recognize that it's normal and natural to kind of default to that, I think that's an important starting point as we talk about this idea of taking perspective, especially when we think about our work with autistic folks. There's a couple of people in the chat. I appreciate you sharing. When I'm advocating for individuals, I would say at least 80% or higher to break down the conflict. Yeah. If you're in the mode, if you're in the zone of like, I am here to advocate for someone, it's probably easier to sort of see multiple perspectives rather than like being in an argument about who was the last one to do the dishes, right? And Catherine shared, I often think my friends need more information about what's going on with me when there's a conflict. So yeah, sometimes it is that like the root of the conflict is that we didn't offer something or something was missed. And by sharing that, that might help resolve it. And then Catherine adds, I think more and feel that maybe I should find out what was happening with them. Yeah, absolutely. We've got to sort of slide our way over to that other side of the continuum, right? So wouldn't it be nice, since we live in our own heads and we're most of the time we think we're the right ones in a situation, wouldn't it be nice to have a tool of clear and effective communication between parties that may occasionally view the world differently? I think so. That's one way that I've heard Carol talk about social stories, a tool of clear and effective communication between parties that may occasionally view the world differently. So we'll talk a little bit later about the definition of social stories and some of the core criteria that underlie social stories. But I wanted to start with a couple of examples along this line of perspective taking and thinking about how do we respond to information that might be missing, right? Like if we're given information or we're providing information that seems to be missing in a situation, how do we react to it? How do we respond to it, right? So here what I have is two stories. Not going to say anything else about them except that they're stories. You may choose to zoom in and out if you're on Mural and want to be able to read them a little bit more clearly. I'm also, just so folks have it, going to put in the chat a PDF version of this in case it's helpful to have as a companion and you want to sort of navigate and zoom in and out on that. There won't be too many more disruptive tech things, but just to orient ourselves and make sure people have what we need, what they need. So I'm curious which of these two stories, if you're when you're able to read them, I wonder which of these two stories um, you'd rather learn from. That's the first question. And if you're on Mural, you can take this check mark and kind of move it to whichever one you would prefer to learn from. If you're in Zoom, you can write story 1 or story 2. Which would you prefer to learn from? And then I'm curious about why. If you're on Mural, you can double click and make a little note, as someone has just started to do. Why would you prefer to learn from one over the other? If you're on Zoom, you can share that in the chat. Which story and why?
Can we just come off chat and say why we chose whatever story we chose?
Sure, sure. Feel free, Tanya.
So if I read story 1, as you notice in the second box, there's a frowny face. Social stories are meant to be read or spoken in a positive note.
Hmm.
And so we don't, we, when reading it or writing it, we don't want to have, no, stop, don't, essentially. And that has, it's not safe. Well, we want to be, it is safe to do this. So
Hmm.
I chose story 2.
Hmm. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. And as I said, different people have different levels of experience with social stories. Sounds like Tanya has enough experience with them to know that we share information in a positive way, and this one doesn't feel super positive, which is why she didn't select it, right? Here's the other one for folks who are having a hard time connecting. Let me check the link again, just to make sure that's going to work for folks. Yeah, I see about a half dozen people on the PDF. Again, sorry, Brenda, you might want to try to reload. Try to find another way to share that if need be. So there's some other folks' thoughts in the chat. Story 1 because it's maybe intended for little kids. Story 1 because it has small pieces of information and illustrations. Um, for my from my perspective, if folks were able to read them, look at them in a little bit more depth, I would say story 2. And this isn't a right or wrong answer. You're welcome to have whatever response you have to both stories. But I very much agree with Tanya's take that if we're going to be learning about something that's new or challenging or hard for us, having a bunch of frowny faces and having a picture of a teacher pulling her hair out because of our behavior doesn't feel to me like a way to learn about something. It doesn't put me in a position to learn about something that's new, challenging, confusing, or hard. This story, by contrast, which comes from the new social story book by Carol Gray. So in case you were looking for the right, wrong answer, that was a little hint of which one might be the preferred story. This one shares very clear, matter-of-fact information with examples about what lines are and why they exist. There's no reference to me making someone mad. There's no reference to me doing something wrong. But I am learning about lines. I'm learning about lines in school. I'm maybe getting information I wouldn't have gotten otherwise. I also saw a couple of other thoughts here. Number 2 is objective and provides information, removes putting the feelings of others over the person we are giving information to. Here. This one has more information, cleaner looking, and is it easy to skim though? Question mark. Okay, yeah, good reactions about format. Great. Okay. Um, let's try another one. This is a little bit different. Here are 2 stories about lines and lining up. And these stories are more similar to one another. And I'd like you to have an opportunity just to read them both. And then the prompt this time is, what did you learn? And how did you feel when you read each?
Hey, Erin, it's Amanda. I just wanted to make sure
Hey.
you can see the chat.
Oh, great. Yes, thank you. I do have it. Thanks, Amanda.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, and Hannah shared teaching flexibility, patience, and self-control. Prefers number 1. Okay. Feel free to add your thoughts, which one you prefer, what are you learning? How are you feeling when you read each one? I'll give folks another 30 seconds. I also need to turn on the light. Okay, so as folks are adding some thoughts, I'll just talk about this briefly to say that this is based on a real situation. I mentioned earlier my student Charles, there he is in first grade. He was, every time we would line up, he would push other kids to get to a very specific spot in line. And so I thought, oh, a social story thing, I've got to try to teach him that he's just going to end up in a different spot. Like that's how lines work. We didn't have assigned, spots in these lines. It was like whoever gets there is going to get there, and you kind of have to get in line in order. So that's why I wrote story 1. It was all about defining this idea of a spot in line, and then it's okay you don't end up in the exact spot you want. And I shared this story with Charles, who was easy going kind of guy. He was always game for like a story, a chat, and he just did not care about this whatsoever. He just didn't seem to care. It didn't connect with him at all. And I was like, but I'm teaching him about spots. Like, isn't this helping him know how lines work? He just didn't respond to it whatsoever, and the pushing continued. Unfortunately, right, I got this kind of wrong. I don't think I landed on what Charles was really looking for. And the reason I knew that is because, again, the pushing continued. We kept having trouble with this. At one point, I kind of had to sort of pull him aside. He was like reaching out for this very specific spot. No, I need to be there. I need to be there. And he was sad, and we had to kind of just, calm ourselves and talk it through. And as we were, he said, I was like, you know what, it doesn't matter. We'll still get to lunch on time. Your food will be waiting for you. No, but it's Cole. He's my true friend. And I said, oh yeah, of course. And you can eat lunch with Cole when you get to the cafeteria. No, but if I'm not next to him, he's not my true friend. And it became clear to me that this was not about understanding how lines work, but that Charles was holding a perception that if you're not next to your friends in line, that they're no longer your friend. And that's got to be painful to see your true friend sort of vanish right in front of your eyes. I would push to get my way next to my friend if I thought I was going to lose them too. Hence the creation of story 2. It's about being next to my friends. And though it took some time, and it was not about this was not about sort of stopping pushing in line. This was about developing an understanding of what true friendship is and the relationship to being next to people in proximity and lines. This story really helped Charles. And when he was getting a little antsy when it was time to line up, this is the story he wanted to read, to be reminded that friends remain true friends even when we're not right next to them. Perspective taken. I don't think Charles was the one here who was not taking people's perspective. I think his educated master's degree holding teacher was not doing a very good job taking his perspective of what he was experiencing and what mattered to him and his values. And until I did, nothing changed. When I did, everything changed. Oh, I don't mean to jump over people's contributions. I appreciate folks who added some thoughts here. Okay, so some folks are like talking about which one they prefer. This one identifies the real motivation. Exactly. It's going to be okay, or you are okay wherever you line up. That's the message. But again, it's for Charles, it had to be connected to this idea of true friendship. Okay. Not exactly sure where I am. Don't worry about it. Whoever posted that note, we'll get you back. So this all connects to a concept that folks might have heard of called the double empathy problem. People may be familiar with this already. It's a sort of gaining more traction. All right, Cheyenne's heard of it enthusiastically. And I want to just do a quick introduction to the double empathy problem from a way I've helped to frame it that I think helps to put this idea of perspective taking into, well, perspective. I had the great joy of co-planning and co-presenting a presentation called Double Empathy in Action, an autistic student and neurotypical teacher's search for effective communication with my former student and now good friend and colleague, Colin Ozeki. He was a 5th grade student when I was a 5th grade teacher. He was in the room right next to me. Colin was in the NEST program. He's autistic himself. And he and I co-created this presentation to explore double empathy and our respective experiences, sort of having these missteps and misunderstandings as a non-autistic teacher and an autistic student. And so I want to play a short clip. It's about 4 minutes from our presentation. Catherine's seen it before. I think Rebecca, who's here, has seen it before. So I hope it does it justice. But it's just a short clip of Colin and me sort of introducing the framing of the double empathy problem. And I just want to say for context that right before I start speaking in this video, we just watched a short TED Talk about how breakdowns in communication happen. So you hear me reference a video. So let me hope that this works, right? A YouTube video should pop up.
But one helpful line that really stands out to
Can
me
people hear it?
is to think of communication as a game of. But one helpful line that really stands out to me is to think of communication as a game of catch with a lump of clay, right? When two people interact, they obviously, as we all are thinking about themselves. That's what we do. That's our starting point for all people. But hopefully we're also trying to think about our communication partner and their perspectives as well, right? These perspectives impact this interaction in all kinds of different ways. And they're influenced by all these different kinds of factors, like they said in the video. Gender, religion, family background, ethnicity, past experience, race, age. So as the video stated, these elements of our identity impact how we communicate.
Wait. I'm sorry. I just got to interrupt here. But look. This is all super cool and really interesting, but I think there's a really big psychographic that's never talked about, and I just think it absolutely needs to be mentioned here. And that psychographic is neurotypes. All these things like gender and race influence our psychology and how we perceive the world. Yeah, absolutely. But what could be more influential to our psyche than the very thing that changes our intellect and the very way we think? Neurotype. Sadly, while we're acknowledging it here with giant bold letters, the rest of the world doesn't give it the same level of consideration. Many neurotypical people are stuck with the mindset that their own way of communication is correct. And autistic people are commonly labeled as being tone deaf, antisocial, unempathetic. They are the ones that are often yelled at to look at someone when being spoken to, or when they misunderstand something, or miss a social cue or whatever, or when they just plain weird someone out. But consider this quote from Damian Milton for a second. It is true that autistic people often lack insight into non-autistic perceptions and culture, yet it is equally the case that non-autistic people lack insight into the minds and culture of autistic people. So why are we, autistic people, the only ones getting the blame for this? It seems to me that this is a very human and common problem that affects all of us. So we all need to be taking the time to think about this and figure out how we can bridge the gap that exists between neurotypical and autistic communication.
Here, Colin. Yes, well said. And we're doing exactly that. That is our aim with you here this morning. So if we look again at these two communicators that we had in this model that we're thinking about communication through, and we understand one to be neurotypical or non-autistic and one to be autistic, people of two different neurotypes, then we can start to see the flaws in this traditional and damaging view of autistic people as lacking empathy or having impaired social communication. In fact, what often happens is that autistic people are expected to think about neurotypical people and the way they interact and communicate a lot. This is what a lot of social skills problems are based on, to think about and do things the way neurotypical people do. But let's think about neurotypical people. We, I'll include myself in this, tend to think a lot about just our own social interaction and not that of autistic people. For that reason, as Milton states, non-autistic people lack insight into the minds and culture of autistic people. This is the double empathy problem. This mismatch between the expectation that autistic people think about neurotypical people and our ways of interacting and communicating, that the expectation does not exist for neurotypical people to do the same, is the crux of the double empathy problem.
Okay. As you can tell, Colin is the best, and co-planning and co-presenting with him is an absolute blast. And he's also so smart and incisive and quick story. The way I even got connected with Colin after I, was his teacher in 5th grade is that when he was in high school, he was doing a research project on like conceptions of disability and the impact on people's behavior. And one of his teachers recommended that he reach out to me. And he called me for an interview for this research project. And I was like, you are asking questions that are like graduate level questions about the impact of the medical model and the social model of disability and why people sort of have the sort of unquestioned reactions to some things that they do. So we brought Colin to be a student speaker for one of our big conference events. He knocked it out of the park. And I've just been very lucky to be able to continue to work with Colin. So I like to express things visually if you haven't noticed that already. And so what I share with people sometimes is we sometimes land in this area right here a lot as adults. We have this person who clearly just isn't understanding things right. So we've got to explain the thoughts of us and the other non-autistic people around them. Like, you're missing something here, right? Like this is information you need. You need to hear this. But we don't do enough of this, which is stopping and pausing and really listening and really trying to imagine the perspective of the autistic person and that we are purporting to support. And it doesn't mean we never explain things. It doesn't mean we don't share information, but I offer you this, that maybe we should try toggling a little bit more between sharing some information and really stopping to listen and honor the perspective of autistic folks. And if we're talking about honoring the perspective of autistic folks, we should do the work. We should learn from the real experts on autism. And it is not me. I'm not autistic. It is not my amazing bosses I've learned so much from. It is autistic people themselves who are the experts on autism. This is a video from, I think, 10, 12 years ago from the BBC called My Autism and Me, by this young woman, Rosie, who shares her perspective on the hardest thing about being autistic for her. And here's the quote, but I just want to play it for folks. This stood out to me so strongly when I watched this, and I think it's worth sharing.
My name's Rosie. I live with my mum, my dad, my brother, and my sister. And one day I want to be a world-famous actress. I also have autism, which means that my brain works a bit differently. I'm going to take you into my world. Because it's not always obvious that people have autism. Some people think we're just mad or being naughty. This lack of understanding is one of the worst things about being autistic.
Wanted you to hear it from Rosie and not just from me. This lack of understanding is one of the worst parts about being autistic. She says, because if people don't understand us, they think we're being mad, or as Siobhan could tell us, in the US, we might say crazy, or naughty, bad, misbehaving. This lack of understanding is one of the worst parts about being autistic. And you hear that over and over again from autistic folks. Yes, I have sensory challenges. Yes, sometimes I'm, might, miss something language processing wise. But honestly, what's hardest about being autistic is the fact that people around me don't understand me and don't seem to be doing the work to try to understand me. And then to make it worse, think I'm the one in the wrong that has to sort of change my behavior and change my thinking to be like other people. And so to try to correct for that and to try to do better, I encourage people all the time to learn from the real experts on autism, which is, again, autistic folks themselves. Maybe we'll just take a minute to do this. You'll have these slides to be able to do this on your own. But I pulled together a good half dozen examples pulled from social media, all from autistic authors, presenters, illustrators, people who are sharing their experiences about sensory, about interests, about the overwhelmedness of the social world, of attention, of communication. And what I'd love to have folks do is just take a minute to, if you're on Mural, you can zoom in and out and take a closer look. I'll do that too a little bit for the people on Zoom, just so you can see some of these in a little bit more detail. If you're on the PDF, you can feel free to zoom in there as well. But let's just do the work to make sure that we're learning from the folks that we are purporting to support, autistic folks themselves. So again, these will be here for folks to look at, whether on the slides or on the Mural board. You'll maintain the link to this. I do encourage anyone who does this work, has autistic folks in your life, to follow autistic people online if you don't already, and be challenged and learn from and get the range of perspectives that exist. But if I didn't know that someone's tag in their shirt felt like a razor, I'm going to be missing something really important to know about that person. If I think someone is talking about an interest over and over again, and maybe it's time for them to move on, and I don't see this panel, do you have to talk about flowers all the time? Well, yes. That's the way this person feels. I'm imagining some kind of safety, comfort in the world that doesn't feel that way to them normally. If I don't have that perspective, I'm going to be missing something really, really important when I try to do anything in support of autistic people in my life. If you have any reactions, please feel free to add them to the chat, add them to Mural. Again, these folks, if you want to take a sec to look them up on Instagram or Google them, I would really encourage folks to do that. These certainly aren't everyone, but a range of perspectives. And also, I'll just say, a lot of what we hear about autism when we do listen to autistic folks comes from white men, and that's sort of the stereotype that exists in the media. Obviously, there are white male autistic people, but it's really important that we hear from women, non-binary folks, and people of color who are autistic, who have very important perspectives to share as well, and whose voices and perspectives aren't always heard as much. Okay. Thank you, Cheyenne, for sharing that. It is hard work. It is hard work. And it's not just, let me try this neat new trick. It is, I've got to think differently about this work and who I am in relation to these other folks I'm working with. So taking perspective was, I hope you experienced some in that last little exploration there. Social humility is, Catherine, I know it's getting dark, but can you remind us?
I'm not sure. Is it wait, no, that's the last one.
This one is, oh.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah. All right. So we're on to
Oh.
of social humility. Thanks. Sorry for putting you on the spot. So social humility. When we hear the word humility, we might have thoughts about that word. We might think of it as being sort of like the opposite of confidence, like you're either confident or you're humble. And if we have that sort of tension in mind, we might have a misconception about what humility is. I found this quote and I like it a lot, and I'm going to share it with you, that humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. So yes, this is hard work, as Cheyenne reminded us. But this doesn't mean I'm dumb and I'm not doing a good job and I'm not worth anything and I have nothing to offer. It does not mean that. But it probably does mean, as I'm figuring out how to share important information and connect with and support an autistic person in my life, I probably should not be centering myself and my experience in that work, right? We just have to think of ourselves less frequently, right? So as I said, this isn't a full social stories training, but thank you for that. Whoever's feeling the love, connecting to this thought. We're going to share the first two criteria of social stories, which begins with social humility, which is the sort of core philosophy of the social stories approach. But first, a definition. Again, everyone here has a different level of experience, expertise, familiarity with social stories, but let's just be clear on what we mean when we say social stories. Here's the official definition of social stories. Recognizing that every human experience and perspective is unique and valid, and that social impairments and their solutions are shared, a social story accurately describes a personally relevant topic, often a context, skill, achievement, or concept, according to 10 defining criteria. These criteria guide story research, development, and implementation to ensure an overall patient and supportive quality and a format, voice, content, and learning experience that is descriptive, meaningful, respectful, and physically, socially, and emotionally safe for the story audience, a child, adolescent, or adult. And you see here an image showing the 10 criteria with that first criterion in the middle, social humility, right in the center at its core. Just as a way to emphasize a couple of things in this definition, accurately describes a personally relevant topic, context, skill, achievement, or concept. Overall patient and supportive quality, that's really key. Descriptive, meaningful, respectful, and physically, socially, and emotionally safe. All of the words in the definition of social stories are important. Those are extra important to sort of hold on to if this is new for you, if social stories are new, or if seeing this definition written this way is new to you. And so what of social stories and this idea of behavior change. I did some Googling. This is always so interesting to do what pops up when you Google social stories. And here's one. Therapy Works says that you can use social stories to improve your child's understanding and behavior, and that they are an easy, effective tool that parents can use to help children learn to adjust their behavior. Did you see anything in the definition of social stories that was about changing children's behavior? Was there anything in the definition of social stories that made you think it was easy? Nope. Neither of those is true. They are very thorough, very thoughtful, and therefore pretty tricky approach to share important information and communicate a message in an accurate and safe way. They're not a tool of behavior change. A friend of mine, a friend of Carol's, posted this years ago, almost 10 years ago now, when he was at one of Carol's workshops. Peter Vermeulen from Belgium, who developed the theory of autism as context blindness, said from Carol's presentation, social stories patiently describe life. They do not prescribe behavior. So how does that happen? Well, it all starts with this first criterion, social humility. This is the core, this is the foundation of social stories. This is the social stories philosophy, and I'll read it to you here, and we'll sort of explore it a little bit together. Social humility acknowledges that each of us has a unique and inherently fallible mind that is prone to make mistakes in response to others, especially children, adolescents, and adults with a diagnosis of autism or other cognitive delay or difference. Social humility casts assumptions and social arrogance aside to objectively research, develop, and share each story or social solution. 5 elements form the foundation of social humility in support of consistently safe, meaningful, and effective communication. And they are: 1, the social impairment that surrounds autism is shared. Right? As Colin said, it's not the autistic person's fault, though blame is laid on them frequently. If there is a breakdown in a social interaction, last time I looked it up, an interaction requires multiple people to be involved. And therefore, if there is a challenge, it's probably located between people and not just residing in one of those 2 people. The social impairment that surrounds autism is shared. 2, each person's perception is valid and deserving of respect. This is true of writing a social story and making sure that we're people's perception is validated is so key in a social story, but it's also a pretty good practice for life when you are having that argument about who did the dishes last. 3, curiosity is confusion with a good attitude. That's one of my favorites. I guess it's like picking your favorite child, but I love the phrase confusion with a good attitude. Oftentimes we associate confusion with being like lost and unsure, and it's a bad thing. If you can reframe that, right? If you can be confused and be okay being confused, but have a good attitude about it, that's true curiosity. 4, never argue perception. If folks are familiar with the strategy of 5-point scale, I think Carrie Dunburn is actually going to speak at this series next week, pretty soon. Sometimes people use a 5-point scale, which like takes a concept and breaks it down into these 5 different sort of levels to explore the shades of gray. I've seen problem scales, for example, right, that are 1, no problem, 2, little glitch, 3, and then 5 is a catastrophe. And I've seen this approach be misused by a teacher, introducing the strategy to students. A student drops their pencil and is really upset about their pencil falling and the tip breaking, and they have a big reaction. And the teacher says, "Come on, it's just a number 1 problem," which it is not to that child in that moment. That sure feels like a 5. We might not know why, and we might have to do some investigating, some research to figure out why, but we're not going to argue the child's perception of that feeling and that experience. And 5, abandon all assumptions. A hard one, part of this big shift but we got to start with a clean slate. We got to surprise ourselves. We got to make sure that we're not entering this interaction with some biases or preconceived notions. And so this mindset is the sort of framing we have to adopt in order to just even consider writing a social story. So let's put this to the test a little bit. I was very happy to be able to help Carol develop something that was called the Social Humility Survey for a long time, just became the Social Humility Project. What we did in part was identify some, there we are, we identified some key connections between not socially humble or socially arrogant sentences that might pop up in a social story and how they might sort of violate these different tenets of social humility. And so here you see the 5 tenets, the 5 elements of social humility that I just shared with you all. And let me see. Sorry, folks. And here are some symbols that sort of correspond with them. So the social impairment that surrounds autism is shared. Here's these little arrows. Each person's perception is valid and deserving of respect is a check. Curiosity is confusion with a good attitude. There's a confused but happy person. Never argue perception is this little person perceiving this image. And abandon all assumptions is a sort of fist, someone who's pretty certain of something and has not abandoned their assumptions. And here are 3 sentences that shouldn't find their way into a social story. There's no reason for me to be upset if I lose one of my paper clips from my pocket. It's fun to play a game with my friends or family. When I'm upset or angry, I will take a deep breath and count to 10, and then I will be happy. So someone's got the idea already and has read the directions. You can drag any of these icons to the corresponding sentence of what element of social humility is violated by this sentence, right? So I might drag this check mark. Each person's perception is valid and deserving of respect. If I tell them there's no reason to be upset, that's not respecting the person's perspective on the situation. Maybe they think they have a reason to be upset if they've lost a paperclip. So feel free to read through those. And if you're on Mural, you can drag those icons over to each of the sentences. And if you're on Zoom and you would prefer to do this in the chat, you can name the sentence using the letter A, B, or C, and the number of the element of social humility it violates, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's like an example right here. Maybe like you say A, 1 and 3, if you feel like contributing. Great. I love all the fists. Number 5 on it's fun to play a game with my friends or family. Abandon all assumptions. That's a pretty big assumption to make, that playing games with your family is fun. I have played some games with my family and did not have fun. I bet most people have had similar experiences in their lives. Yeah, and seeing some folks identify that last one, when I'm upset or angry, I will take a deep breath and count to 10, and then I will feel happy, as violating never argue perception. That might not be the experience of the person that we are working in support of. Absolutely. And I see some folks in the chat, B, 4, and 5. Yeah, never argue perception and abandon all assumptions. It's a big assumption to make, that they're going to have fun playing a game, right? What if they don't? How will that feel to have your experience invalidated because you are supposed to, you are told that it is fun to do this thing? Yeah, Tanya, same. Monopoly was invented to break families apart, I think. Okay, great. So we're going to continue to move along. But I hope this, as we've been able to sort of explore these, you hear about them and you get to interact them a little bit and think about some examples of how these might be violated here. I want to offer one more story for you all. And this bridges from criterion 1, social humility, into criterion 2, which is called discovery. And the discovery step of creating a social story is essentially about research. It's what's going on here, really. And am I going to write a story, or am I going to find an alternate solution? Really appreciate that social stories is a strategy where one of the steps is determine if this is actually the right strategy, or maybe it is not. Most strategies you find are like, this has got to be the thing. This is it, folks. This one builds in the fact this might not be what is needed in a certain situation. So this discovery step has 2 parts. Authors gather relevant information. You got to know what's going on. You got to learn from the child what the situation is. You've got to observe what's happened in the past. You got to talk to lots of people, teachers, parents, and family members. And you've got to identify the specific topic or an alternate non-story solution. As I just said, it might not be a social story. So this brings us to Nick. Nick was very well known on the 3rd floor of PS32 for saying, "Oh, this is so boring." He said it a lot, loudly. And I thought I was being very creative. And you can see a little example here. One day I brought Nick up for lunch. I bought us pizza, and we had the Class 5-3 annual bore off. We had a little competition to see whose life was more boring. And I was certain I was going to win because laundry, he doesn't have to do laundry as a 10-year-old. And, you know, like whatever, taxes, he doesn't do taxes. I definitely have stuff in my life that is more boring. So we came up with a 5-point scale about boringness. How boring is it? That Nick came up with the words for and the drawings for. And then we each wrote out things that were boring in our life and compared, and it was actually a tie. It was fun and lighthearted, but it didn't stave off this is so boring. It just kept happening. And I was like, oh, come on, Nick, remember, it's, you know, we all have boring things in our lives and it's not so bad. We can get through it. And my life's boring too. It just kept going. And I really thought this was going to be the thing. Until one day, Nick was working with some classmates on developing like their own version of Pokemon. I think they called it Lugion or something like that. And he was so into it. He loved it. But then he shouted, "This is so boring. Come on, this is so boring." And I said, Nick, what do you mean this is so boring? I thought you really like it. He said, "I do, but it's so boring." I was like, well, what is it? What does it feel like when something's boring? And he's like, "Oh God, I just like don't know what to do." And I realized, oh, you're using a different word for something than I use. When I'm feeling that way, I use the word confusing. He's like, "Fine, okay, but it's just so boring." I didn't tell him that he was using the wrong word, though that thought was in my mind. He had a different way of expressing the fact that he was confused. These months and months, he was not experiencing things as boredom. He was so confused, and that is the way he expressed it. So we ended up not having a social story or article. We ended up developing a help scale. If something's feeling boring, aka confusing, how much help do you think you're going to need for this math homework, a 1, 2, or a 3? And you let me know, and you'll get the help you need. That's what staved off "this is so boring." That was my oh moment. If we are lucky enough to have people in our lives, like some folks in present company have someone wonderful like Jade in their life, we have the great privilege of being able to get a perspective on what social stories offer and are all about. This is a quote from Jade McWilliams, known by some present company here, who says that social stories are a way of being generous with information, a way of sharing essential knowledge. I love the phrasing of being generous with information. And just since this isn't a full social stories workshop, but just to offer a little bit more context, social stories have 2 types of sentences. You might have heard of that, or maybe if you heard an earlier version of social stories, there were more previously. But really, there are 2 sentence types these days, and one is a descriptive sentence, and one is a coaching sentence. Descriptive sentences describe, offer information, and coaching sentences coach. And they, offer maybe a suggestion of something that someone can do. But all social stories have way more descriptive sentences than they have coaching sentences. And oftentimes, Social stories don't have any coaching sentences. When we are being generous with information, sometimes all folks need is the information. They don't need to be told what to do. Autistic people are told what to do a lot. Autistic people are corrected a lot. Often doesn't lead to the most productive changes in understanding and even in behavior. But the more we can be generous with information and offer perspective, the more likely that people are going to feel like they're being understood and their needs are met and they have the information they need to be successful in life. So I'm just keeping a little eye on time. Maybe we can do this briefly, but I'd be really interested to hear see people's reactions to this. What's here in front of you now is there are 5 different quotes. These are quotes, some from Carol, who developed social stories, and some from autistic folks. You heard the one from Jade just a second ago, and also there's another great one I really like from the Autism Level Up folks, that social stories is not rules written nicely. And what you could do is, if you are on Mural and you want to, you can grab any one of these 3 icons. When you read a quote, does it affirm something you already believe? And you can just drag that right over. All right. Or does it challenge you with a new idea? Oof, never thought of it that way. Or for you, does it raise a question? So if you're on Mural, feel free to move those around, as some folks are doing now. Sorry, they're bopping behind the quotes. You might need to just kind of put them next to them. If you're on Zoom, you can add your contributions in the chat. Which quote are you responding to, and what is it doing for you? And yes, Cheyenne, they're great. I've seen Amy and Jack present a couple of times, and they're always fabulous. They have great resources online. Great. A whole lot of affirmation. That tells me we have a sort of a like-minded crew here. Either that or I'm doing a real good job convincing you. Okay. Great. So, social humility. That's our, something is revealed to us when we open up our perspective and we do abandon assumptions, and we get to recognize that a child might be using a different word for an emotion than we realize, that someone might be experiencing something in a very different way than we thought. And so we kind of have to have that moment when we're being socially humble, to have the recognition, the realization that we need often to be able to support folks. So now we're in the home stretch here, talking about safety and respect. I thought this was an important element to include because I recognize many people here are coming, are joining sort of a part of this youth mental health series. I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist or anyone in the mental health field. I don't have those qualifications. Social stories are not a support or a strategy that are designed to specifically to support someone with mental health concerns per se. But I recognize that there is a real overlap between some of the challenges that happen surrounding autistic folks and some real implications and ramifications for folks' mental health. And I've had the great pleasure of being able to work with someone named Jillian Boudreau, who is herself a psychologist, a clinical psychologist, and a school psychologist who's done some fabulous work that focuses on safety. So quickly, just a note here about a connection between safety and respect and social stories. One of the sort of rules or guidelines or sort of things that make social stories a social story is that an audience or a child, a person's first social story should celebrate. Let's imagine here that this young child is brushing their teeth for the first time or with more ease than they did before. So that's occasion to write a social story to celebrate. The reason I started by saying to think of a situation is because I didn't want to necessarily have everyone jump to a challenge, something that's really, on people's minds that's really difficult. Maybe the situation is you have someone that's made a lot of progress and you want to recognize that and celebrate that, right? That's an important part of this work. Another guideline rule of social stories is that at least half of social stories or social articles should celebrate achievements. This is not an intervention that is designed to correct, offer, tell you what you're doing wrong, certainly not in the construction of the stories, but also not in the way the topics that are shared, right? I think, unfortunately, I had the experience of using comic strip conversations with kids a lot, and I had this one 5th grade student who I said, hey, can we draw a quick picture? And he's like, oh no, not another comic strip, which was a good indication for me that I was doing it wrong. I was only focusing on the negative. Rebecca, I'm grateful for you sharing the link to a podcast that Jillian was recently on where she shared some of this. So some of Jillian's work is around the idea of stress and safety. And this is an image I drew after hearing a talk that she gave. But Jillian talks about how there are these luxurious brain functions like empathy, like curiosity, like problem solving and perspective taking, these luxurious brain functions that we think of as what it means to be human, but that can only come online if further down in the base of our brains, the down and back parts of our brain, we have a sense of safety. When we are on high alert and feeling unsafe, something's dangerous, we are experiencing fear, we are not able to be empathic, to problem solve, to take perspective and be curious. And it's important to know, not just for autistic folks, but all people, that under stress, humans are thrown out of basic safety mode and into survival mode, which blocks these non-emergent but massively important functions. Jillian calls this being knocked off the balance beam of basic safety. Another important connection to make here is to the work of Ross Green, who folks might be familiar with. Doesn't do work specifically in autism, but this sentiment he shares is just as true in working with autistic folks as it is anyone else, that your explanation guides your intervention. The mindset you have, the framing you have going into a situation is going to impact your behavior as the adult in the situation, right? And so just for time, we won't engage in this activity, but just to consider, imagine a child who's having a hard time and some group of people go into a meeting to figure out how to support them, this young girl, and some people say she's being manipulative. What is that going to mean in terms of what they think is an appropriate response? Another group of people come in talking about the same situation and the same young girl and say, it looks like she's experiencing a loss of control. How do those two different explanations impact the intervention, the response, what that team of adults might choose to do to respond and to support that child? One way I found it really helpful to think about problematizing this idea of like behavior or behavior challenges is to think differently about behavior and just think of it as the relationship between stressors and dysregulation. If we say, oh, he's just doing that for attention, or he's manipulating you, or he knows very well what he's doing, he just needs to learn how to stop. That's very different than if we say, I think a child might be experiencing a sensory overload or might be overwhelmed by sense of ambiguity and not knowing what to expect, or might have unreasonable demands placed on them for their attention or their ability to sit still. This is what's leading to them being dysregulated. Yeah, maybe they're raising their voice or resisting demands. Yeah, maybe they just try to get out of this environment that's uncomfortable for them. And yes, maybe they shut down. But likely this is because stressors, whether we're aware of them or not, are being dysregulating for them. I really want to share as we begin to wrap up here this fabulous article that actually was a social article that was written by someone who's joining us right now about anxiety might be helpful sometimes. And again, you'll have this in the handout to review. But social articles are just a different format of a social story that are often shared with older folks, teenagers and older, to make the format sort of match something that they may be able to connect with more, sort of shared in a sort of different way. And this is an article that Siobhan Timmons wrote. This comes from one of her many books that I have here in this wonderful stack of wonderful books that I will put up right here. And yes, you can smile and be proud and take credit. Siobhan, she has this great series, Growing Up with Social Stories, where she shares really her journey of working with and in support of her son and writing social stories and social articles to support him with his permission. And this was a fabulous social article about anxiety and how anxiety is sometimes helpful, but sometimes harmful. And all this is such a wonderful way to, again, just share a context and share information that her son might not have had. And rather than being sort of overwhelmed by feeling anxious, to be able to sort of maybe sense into what he was experiencing, to kind of know, is this the kind of anxiety that I'm excited about, or something that might feel uncomfortable? And I had to end with my final story here, again, about getting it right, making sure that we're doing this work safely. This is Oscar here, and this is my attempt at a social story about this idea of sensitive topics. He had strong stances on lots of things, and people had big reactions when he shared his stances on transgender rights and other aspects of politics, as one can imagine. I tried the social article, again, didn't quite take. The thing that ended up working with him, we did a love and hate-o-meter. And we got a bunch of different images of celebrities and politicians and topics and sports teams. And different people just marked where they landed on the meter. And we just talked very openly about how we feel about these different people and things, and how strongly we feel about these people and things. And then we drew some quick, simple comic strips about the fact that two people can sort of be thinking about the same thing and have very opposite reactions. And just, I think my assumption is that just by being validated and recognizing that he was entitled to have those feelings and those opinions, I wasn't telling him to not think those things, it sort of softened his strong stances that he would take, feeling like he needed to convince people, that his stance was right. And I'll share this sentiment from another guest that joins us here today, because again, I don't think this is just work that has to do with working in support of and around autistic folks, but really all people. That Catherine, who's been oohing and umming for us today, has shared before that what's autism friendly is human friendly. Humans are a diverse bunch of beings, indeed. And if we can take a stance where we validate and create safety for people and share helpful information without prejudgment, that's not just going to help autistic people, that can be a good thing for everyone. So as we wrap up, I recognize we're a little over the time, and I want to make sure we have our time for questions and also for our amazing panel. I want to do just a quick summary to pull this all together. We talked about perspective taking, that there are multiple equally valid perspectives when we're experiencing some kind of a breakdown in communication or understanding. We talked about social humility, that we need to abandon our assumptions and we need to be authentically curious. And we've talked about safety and respect and how we need to recognize the central importance of safety to these luxurious brain functions that we expect people to have, like empathy and problem solving, right? And to pull these all together, I would say that by committing to do the work, to take the perspective of autistic people in our lives, which requires us to really check our assumptions and be really authentically curious, we can help them feel safe and understood and make some part of their world more predictable, which can help make them feel more safe. So if folks wouldn't mind sharing either on Mural, or if you're more comfortable, in the chat. What are you leaving with? What commitment do you make to trying to put this thinking and this work into action in some way? There's a couple of suggested prompts here. From now on, fill in the blank. Now I will. I commit to. I intend to think more about. And if you're on Zoom, feel free to add your response to the chat. Start with any of these prompts or any other that you have. What are you leaving with today? And what are you going to try to commit to do, given what we've explored here together? And I'm just going to zoom in to see some of these. Thanks, folks, for adding them to the chat. I intend to think more about luxurious brain functions. Yeah, I really encourage you to look up Jillian's work. It's fabulous. Someone is committing to honoring that children are more alike than different. Yeah, Dorothy Siegel's quote. And deserve to be educated together whenever possible, is how that quote ends. And as including more social stories to celebrate successes. Yes, fabulous. Agree, I never thought of our brain functions as luxury. Yeah, man, if we're able to be curious and have empathy, we're lucky. That means we're in a good enough place and we're feeling safe and grounded enough to be able to do that work. Committing to using social articles universally as all humans benefit. Here, here. I saw one high school after actually Colin was having a hard time with the change of semester, didn't know there would be different classes and different places you'd have to sit. They created a high school bulletin and they just shared it with every single student. Here's what to expect at the semester change. You might have the different class, you might sit in different seats, some rooms might change, and they just started distributing that every single year to every single student. Helps all people. Committing to understanding and not using my perspective as other perspective. Look at alternatives to what others mean with words and behaviors. Yeah, clear as kind. Here, here. Jillian's last name is Boudreau. Jillian Boudreau. Definitely look her up. Great. If you are interested in more, again, you don't have to jot this all down now. You'll have this in the slides, but there's some great books I'd recommend, some great websites and articles, both about social stories and also neurodiversity. There's my information if you want to look at my website or follow me online or chat with me in some way. And I want to thank you all for bearing with me these last couple of hours and hope that as I aimed to, that you're feeling like you feel a little bit better informed, that you feel better equipped to be a true support for some kind of person in your life, autistic or otherwise, and that you can help people who are misunderstood be better understood and help them feel seen and help make things predictable and share information that can help them feel more safe and feel connected in this tricky world that we live in. So thanks, y'all. Thanks again to Carol for this really powerful and inspirational work, and to Catherine and Siobhan for being such fabulous partners who I learned from so much, and also all of the folks at Great Lakes ROTA-RC for organizing this. Appreciate it, y'all.
Thanks, Aaron. We'll move now into our lived experiences panel. Aaron's gonna host us. He so graciously offered to do that. We'll move questions to the end, unless anyone's got a terribly burning question for Aaron. If you wanna, we'll just take a minute here to pop it in the chat for him. Otherwise, we wanna make sure that we have enough time for our panel to share their experiences. We've got 3 questions that Aaron has prepped for us. So I want to first give our panel members an opportunity to introduce themselves and to get into those 3 questions, and for people to have an opportunity to get to know them and what they're bringing today, and to be part of that experience. We don't often get an opportunity in ROTA to have a lived experiences panel, so we really want to be able to enjoy that opportunity. So I'm going to start with Anna, then we'll follow up with Megan.
Okay, Megan Chrysler and I are sharing a space, and so we have one of us muted and the other one not, so hopefully everyone can hear me. But my name is Anna Bina, and I am an autism program support teacher. So my role is primarily helping problem solve and collaborate with the adults, the staff, and parents. But what that entails is often getting the student perspective in order to really inform the work that the adults are doing. And so I just love all of the resources from Carol Gray's team, and everything Erin had to say today was just like really, really, really awesome and helpful. And so I'm really excited to be here. I'm a speech language pathologist by trade, but that is the work that I do. And again, I'm just really excited to be here. So thank you.
And I am Megan Chrysler. I am a program support teacher at Sauk Prairie Middle School in Sauk City, Wisconsin. And what program support teacher means to people that aren't familiar in the educational world is essentially a teacher of the teachers. So I help review IEPs for compliance. I do some brainstorming. We do some observations and programming discussions. And really my purpose this year is to coach in and lean in on that student-centered forward thinking as it pertains to the IEP. I subscribe to the Book of Bina and rely heavily on her guidance, knowledge, thought-provoking questions, etc. And so my role is really to work with the adults to be able to better serve students as it pertains to their individualized education plans.
Awesome, thank you. And for those of you who are familiar with Great Lakes ROTA-RC and you've been part of some of our education before, you know me as the regional project manager. Today, I get the joy of joining as a mom with a young person with lived experience, a mom of a 14-year-old who is currently a freshman. And he has had the joy, we have had the joy of having Anna as our support person for the last several years, and coming through the school with Megan as well. So I'm excited to be here today in a different capacity. So I appreciate having our program director, Jen, take the helm at the start of the session. So that's the panel today. Erin, I'm going to hand us over into your capable hands.
Great. Thanks, Amanda. And thanks for being here to play this role for the panel. So I shared a couple of examples of my sort of like missteps in my journey of trying to figure out the best way to understand and support autistic folks in my life. And clearly, as I hope was evident in the exploration there, it's really core to social stories to do like research on what we as like the author of a story understand the autistic person's perspective to be. And sometimes we learn that we made a faulty assumption, right? That we sort of derail our support because of that. So I'm wondering if folks are comfortable being vulnerable and humble enough to share some of the times when you got it wrong and what you kind of learned in the process of how that assumption maybe got in the way of being able to really understand and support someone.
Yeah, so I think one of my greatest missteps was a student that was transitioning to us. We're a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade school building. So this student in particular had come from an elementary school, but out of COVID was at home school for about a year and a quarter. So rather than returning to the in-person instruction part-time, they took a year of home virtual instruction. And he came with a set of social stories, to use the term loosely in that perspective, that reminded him of all the rules of school. And so when we started to see some dysregulation behaviors that looked like hitting, spitting, kicking, like, oh, we have to write the rules at school. The rules at school are, the rules at school are. But if you asked him, which we did later after we figured out he didn't need to know about the rules at school, if you asked him, he knew all the rules at school. He knew that hitting is not safe and that spitting shares germs and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He needed to know who to ask and how to ask and what is it at middle school he could ask for instead of, right? So he needed that advocacy pathway. And so just thinking about, we have to, we have to read it every day and we have to talk about it and we have to remind him. He didn't need a reminder. He needed to know who he could advocate to and what would be a more beneficial advocacy strategy, because he was still achieving what he needed. He wanted a different adult attention, right? He wanted to have people bring the resources to him. So he would hit and voila, the resources would appear, the options would be presented. But when given a concrete visual, the support to know, oh, here are my regulation choices. I could point to it. I could go get it. I could ask you for it. I could use my AAC. When given that opportunity, you saw a reduction in some of those behaviors that were also getting him that same outcome, right? So I think one of the greatest disservices was just asking, right? Or taking time to consider his baseline knowledge. We just assumed like, oh, he needed to be reminded about the rules at school, and that in and of itself was not the case.
And I think to build off of that in that particular instance, right? Like when you know better, you do better. When you're talking about the rules of school and how it makes people feel uncomfortable or that kind of a thing, like you aren't taking in the perspective of the autistic child, right? And you're centering the feelings and the reactions of the other people around them over the child. And so it goes away from being an information-based tool to something that is just misguided and it's just wrong. Like I don't have a better way to say it, right? And so I think that can be translated across many things, but in that particular instance, right, when you center how to advocate for what you need, there's a reduction in behavior and everyone benefits. But mostly that child starts to feel that sense of safety. And if we're thinking about neuroception and engagement, if they feel like they have a way to get their needs met, now the behaviors go down, engagement goes up, and everybody wins in a really healthy and safe way. So I think that to build off of that is something that's really important. Do you want me to give another example of a time I got it really wrong, Aaron?
Sure, go for it. The more the merrier. Thank you for being willing to share more.
So there was a student in 4th grade who just kept running out of the room in the morning, and that was morning meeting. And the teacher was saying like, he just won't attend morning meeting. He's running. Like, can you help us attend? Can you help us problem solve around this? And so we're thinking about, okay, like, well, what kind of spot does he need? Is he feeling too crowded by people? And we were really trying to do it from a loving, really supportive way, right? This isn't punitive. That's not our jam, but we weren't really thinking about what the behavior was communicating. We were trying to think about how to like optimize the environment to increase that engagement. And when we tried a bunch of different things and it just wasn't working, and we're thinking, we need a social story about what it means to be, let's give him information about morning meeting, right? Like make sure he knows the expectations, he knows he has access to his AAC, make sure he has the question ahead of time to feel foreshadowed, right? Like we're making sure he's got all the things. And it just wasn't working. It wasn't working. And when somehow we finally got to the place where we asked him, it sounds so annoying that it was somehow, right? Like if that was like the last thing. And he's a non-speaking student. He does have a lot of difficulty accessing his device consistently, right? And so somehow he was saying, run, right? So I was like, well, maybe he just needs the movement, right? And it's embarrassing that it took that long. But when we switched his day, and the running was unsafe. So the running led to hiding, and in schools, you have to know where kids are, and kids need to be safe. And so we had to find an alternative that met that need. And when we got him swimming every morning for an hour and then coming to school, and the class was willing to change their morning meeting so that he could join when he arrived, so that he still got that really quality peer interaction and was able to participate in a meaningful way for him. There was no running away from morning meeting. Morning meeting went great, right? So he didn't need to learn about morning meeting. His body needed to feel calm from that transition from home to school, and he needed to get that regulation. and then he could do it, and he could demonstrate what he knew in a very supported and modified way, but there was that participation in that engagement. So that's one. It's one of many examples that I could give you of how we kind of got there, but it took a while.
Yeah, that's another great example. I like both Megan and Anna are sharing, like, it wasn't that he needed or, needed to understand, but instead there's this, like, we thought it was and it turned out to be. And I just appreciate it feels embarrassing. It's a, like, knock to the ego when you care about your work and you're trying to do good things. It doesn't feel good to, like, recognize you've gotten it wrong and course correct. But so I appreciate y'all being willing to share that. And I do think that's one of the things that makes this work hard, the paradigm shift hard. It does require this real humility to be like, I'm gonna mess up, and then I'm gonna do better, and things will probably get better when I do better. But in the meantime, I'm gonna make some mistakes, and that's hard. That's not mince words. That's hard. Amanda, do you have an example that you wanted to share?
I think just as a parent, you're growing your kids and they start out not knowing anything. They don't have any technical skills, and they don't have any life experience. And so that transition, when they start to get some technical skills, being able to step back and realize that they don't need to be told everything, that's really hard. But I remember my son started in a parochial school first. And so he didn't have an Anna, he didn't have a support specialist. And so that he would come across issues in school, and he was naughty, or he was high risk taking. And at home, I'd be like, this is the least risk taking child ever. He would ride his bike. He'd be like, whoa, it's too fast, Mom. I'd be like, buddy, we got to pedal faster or the bike won't go. He was just super afraid of, like, going too fast with the bike. And this is the same kid who would go to school and they'd be like, he is a very risk taking. I'm like, I don't think we're seeing the same kid here. And it would be things like the ball would, roll into the window well, and he would jump down into the window well to get the ball because he was a helper. And so we would I learned very quickly that this is a child who, he just wants to he has a certain pathway. He sees things a little bit differently. And that developed into, he needs the system explained to him. He wants to see the big picture. Otherwise, he doesn't understand. Like, to him, that going into the window well to get the ball, he didn't understand that he might not be able to get out of that window well. Now, he's very strong. He got out. So it was like, I don't get what you're worried about. I don't understand the problem here. But, like, kind of explaining to him, like, these are the possible risks of doing that activity. Then he was like, I will never do that again. That was scary. Now that I know that was a possible outcome. And he never did. And he still is kind of like, wow, we stay away from window wells. They're kind of scary. So like, he just needs to kind of understand, like, the whole thing. But he's just kind of like, this is a problem, I need to solve it. And is still kind of a person who, what is the role of an adult again? Like, if I can fix it myself, why would I engage anyone else in this issue? But it's just kind of like walking people through that. And now the more technical knowledge he has, it's kind of understanding and compromising with him a little bit, but you don't have the life experience. So, like, engaging adults who have more life experience can kind of help flush that situation out a little bit more. And we have to, like, keep working on that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear the outcome, but the unfortunate sort of context for that, of people assuming he was risk taking, which, like you said, did not comport with Mom's take on who her child was, or this idea of being naughty, right? Which we heard Rosie say in that video too, right? These misconceptions were like, there are reasons why this thing is happening, and it's got to be this, and so therefore we have to do this course of action. When that's so misguided, you're not going to get anywhere, and it all it does is do damage. And when you can find the source of the misunderstanding, the lack of information, whatever it might be, like, that's where you can actually truly support someone with what they might need in a situation, right? Yeah, no, great examples. So this is a related question, but I'll pose this to the three of you also. That we talked about how we have to sort of honor fully honor the perspective of the autistic person in our care. And I'm just curious how any experiences you've had where you've seen a young person sort of like change when you've noticed that they felt like seen or understood at last, or that their like perception or experience was like validated. Like, what did you see change, and sort of how could you tell that that's what was happening?
I want you to talk about the recent evaluation meeting we just had, and then we'll talk about the follow-up from that. You give me an example. The Rocket Book.
Oh, so we had a student who was really, he wanted to attend his evaluation meeting and he was really uncomfortable during it. And he kept kind of getting closer to me. And we had really only met a couple days before as part of the evaluation. He kept getting closer to me, and his parents would say something and he would mutter under his breath his version of it. And he wasn't comfortable sharing it with the group, but he was really processing what the adults were saying and how his perspective was different. And so when I was writing notes to him about that, and then I was using, his perception was that his perception was that the adults just didn't understand him, right? And so when I started to show him that I understood or was listening, even not that I quite got it, he just kept calming down. And then the next day he was able to come to our office when he was struggling, and I happened to be in the building because I'm a district-wide employee, and he needed a place to be because he feels like he needs to wear a coat while he's at school all the time, but he doesn't like to be sweaty and he doesn't like to be hot. And so we were thinking like, oh, he has to wear his coat because it's protective, or, it's a sensory thing, or whatever.
Pressure or protects, right?
Yeah. And then we got to the source, like when I started to ask him questions, and he was calm because we had kind of shown him that we are listening and we are trying and we are validating anything you have to say. He said it was all about his body image, actually, and the fact that his mom picks out his clothes and they don't feel like they're a good fit for him, but he doesn't have any choice in that.
And he wouldn't offend her. Like
yeah.
I would never say that to my mom, but really, here's what's up. Right?
Yeah, like he really values her. And so we were able to introduce him, once we kind of got to the crux of the problem, introduce him down in the storeroom where we have, the social worker has lots of options, to the idea of a vest, so that he was able to feel that comfort right now until he's ready to kind of bridge that conversation with his mom about some of the clothing choices. But yet he didn't have to be so hot and so sweaty. And you could just see him calming down, and then he was willing to go back to class because he had been validated. And so that's not a long-term example, but it was just kind of a short-term example of how he felt validated, he felt concerned after kind of being in that meeting with me and me not really reacting to his negatively or trying to correct his perceptions of what the adults were saying, just like listening and taking them in. He was able then to come on a different occasion and kind of problem solve versus exiting the building, which is a strategy that he occasionally, uses. And when he was going outside because he's hot and it's cold, it's winter in Wisconsin. So if you can't take off your coat, but you're very hot and you don't like to be sweaty or smelly because that would offend the people around him, is what he was then able to kind of share. You have to go outside for a little bit and get some relief. Whereas adults were seeing him being highly unsafe and leaving the building, right? And so again, I'm not sure if that's exactly the example you're looking for, but it just illuminates that idea of like when you really get to the student perspective and you honor it and you're not challenging it or trying to correct it, like there is some skill development in there. There's some things that we can work on and try to like target for, understanding how to better advocate or, that kind of a thing at a different time. But in those moments when you can just validate and gather the information and take their perspective, pretty powerful things can happen.
Well, and I would say we're roommates here, so I happen to be working on something else. We have radios that inform us of certain things. That student appears on the radio, staff are looking for him, supposed to be in this location, is not, right? Like, as the helpers that we are, we're like, let's see if we can figure this out. We just had that connection last night. Let's try. And I think the biggest thing for us was he was in flight, right? Like, gotta leave, I can just take care of it. I know what I'm gonna do. And like, he because of that relationship, because we didn't interrupt, we didn't try to project, we didn't say, oh, but this instead, right? He allowed us, like, we got consent to talk about, like, well, because you're in this space and it's just us, would it be all right if you just, took your coat off, cool down right here? Like, could you do that? And like asking permission or seeking consent.
Versus telling them, you have to take your coat off, you're hot. We don't wear coats inside, blah, 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 blah.
Right?
Like adults.
So
like
that consent happened, and we have a little wardrobe closet back here, like our regular book bags, our own jackets. I'm a vest wearer. I've got my vest version today. I was like, you know what? You like coats. They feel good. Have you ever thought about like a thinner jacket, like a windbreaker or a raincoat? No, I've never thought about that before. What would that? And I said, well, the trade-off would be that it'd be a little more crinkly and make a little more noise. It might be a little more swishy. I said, I happen to have one right here in the closet. Would you maybe want to try it on, see what it's all about? Yeah, I think I could do that. Great, give it a whirl. So put the coat on, was super intrigued, kind of interested. Obviously, I am 35
middle-aged woman.
I don't think 35 is middle-aged, but I'll take that. I was like, it's my size. It might not be yours, but at least this will give us a feel for if it's even a possibility. You tell us, give us some feedback. Put it on, zipped it up. He wanted to look at himself in the mirror. I was like, great. I've got my iPhone, like I can hold it up for you. And he's like, kind of like that.
And I think like what you're describing, right, is like we weren't rushing him. There was no urgency, and we were letting him regulate in that space, because when I caught him going out of the building, he was in a pretty like high space. And how he came back in was, I have a Rocket book. I don't know if you know that, it's kind of like a whiteboard notebook situation that he's very intrigued by. And so I brought that along when I ran downstairs and said like, oh, I'm wondering if you just wanted to use this for a couple minutes and then go up. I know it really helps you to draw when you're feeling frustrated, right? And so we were able to get him back in.
He felt seen.
And he felt seen.
Validated. He felt like, they asked. They didn't tell. They didn't presume. They didn't, right? And so just even that moment of like, he had yet, right? We're in February, yet to take his coat off on a school day, right? So PE, 80 degrees, -30, right? We've got the 7 wonders of the world up here in Wisconsin, right? He had never done that. And we not only got him to remove the jacket, try something different, give us some feedback, experience. And I was like, you know what? Let's go see what's up. And that whole experience, like after gaining that consent, like, would it be okay if we tried a few things, right? Yes. And more communicative, more transparent, less hesitant in sharing thoughts and opinions. And the next time, right, like saw him in the hall, I was like, that's very becoming of you, right? Like, that looks great. And that was part of what he had shared too, as part of the process, is like, I want, like, the clothes I wear don't match the persona I have of myself. So when other people understand or notice, but because of that relationship, it's like we could notice. We were invited into that, like, I need your feedback and I trust it now because you didn't presume, you didn't, right?
And we used language. So he used words like, these clothes don't accentuate my body. These are not becoming of me. He's a very formal speaker, right? And so when we were using the same language, we weren't trying to make him hip or cool or sound like a 7th grader. We were just honoring the way that he was speaking about that. So again, I'm not sure if that's what you're looking for, but it is an example of how I think if we think about a dysregulated child and a child who feels seen and just can kind of take a deep breath for a minute, even if just when they're in your space. And I know that in schools, it can be hard for kids, and we think about masking. So if I can get a kid to just like unmask and take a deep breath in my space and feel safe for a minute so they can get out of that protective state. Because I think we know, like when we go back to mental health, we know that the longer you're in a protective state, the longer you're in survival, the longer you're masking, the poor outcomes we have for mental health. So.
I'll respond by saying that it doesn't matter what I'm looking for. You shared, I think, really valuable, important story, lesson about validating a person's experience and helping someone feel seen and offering solutions rather than expecting or demanding or insisting on them. So whatever I was looking for in this question matters less than what you just shared. But I would say I think it's a pretty good example of a time when a child felt seen and validated, and how you could tell. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's fabulous. Amanda, do you want to share as well?
Yeah, I have a really short example. So it was about a year ago. My son was on a phone call with another family member. The family member, he just shared like a tough time at school, like a tough situation that he was going through. I don't remember if it was with a friend or what it was about, but he was struggling. And the family member wasn't listening. They were trying to solve the problem for him and tell him what to do. And I was sitting in the same room, so I had the opportunity to kind of just listen. And I had that aha moment of going, oh man, I do this to him. Like I have heard myself like do the same kind of thing because I could hear both sides of the conversation. He was on speaker. He often like talks on speakerphone to family members because he doesn't like to be on the phone. And sometimes he'll do that with family members so I can help him with conversations. And this is one of those occasions. I didn't help him in he wasn't asking for my help. So I just sat and listened and I thought about what am I to do about this? And when he got off the phone, I said, hey, I do that to you, I think. I tell you what to do rather than just listen to how you're feeling. And I'm really sorry. I think in the future, from now on, when you come home from school and you share that your day has been difficult, you're struggling with something, I will try harder to just listen and ask you if there's anything I can do to help. And you have my permission as an adult, because I said sometimes as adults, we get caught up in our own stuff. I said the reason why we do that sometimes as grown-ups is because we're anxious or we're worried for you and we want to solve it, want to fix it for you because that's just what we've been doing since you were little. So it comes from a place of like a good intention and wanting to protect you. So I want you to know that that's why that adult was doing that. It's not that they don't think you're capable. They just want to like take care of you. But that's not okay. As adults, as you get older, we need to try and take care of our own feelings about that and let you have more opportunities to solve your own problems. So I said, as your mom, I'm giving you the okay. If I do that and you don't want me to fix things and you feel like I'm fixing things, to say to me, Mom, stop fixing it and just listen. And that will be our clue though between us, and I'll back down. I'll take a deep breath and I'll just listen. And sometimes we do that and it goes well, and sometimes it doesn't and we argue. Not because he said it, like he said, Mom, just listen, and I've gotten mad at him, but just because we forget to do those things, we forget to do those words. But that was a real aha moment. And so when I said that he just kind of went, oh, cool. Thanks, Mom. And like that's like just for him to like have that moment of like that I was listening, and like he was really frustrated in that conversation and he was placating the other adult and you could tell he didn't feel heard. And I didn't try and fix, I didn't try to make it okay with the other person. I didn't try and apologize on their behalf. I just acknowledged my own behavior and to try and do something different. And the ease in his posture and his language is cool. Okay, Mom. And which is a big deal for my son.
Yeah, that's really lovely. And I appreciate everyone's willingness to share these tricky things and where you felt like you might have gotten it wrong with a public audience. And I think it's hopefully, I hope it's not the case that anyone who's attending and participating tonight feels like myself or anyone else shared something is like, oh, they're telling me I'm doing it wrong, or oh, they disparaged something that I find myself doing. I think as Anna said earlier, like there is this sort of, you do it to until you know better, and once you know better, you do better. Angelou reminds us or challenges us, and all of us, I think, in sharing this sort of journey, what we tried, what we got wrong, our default mode that we still have to kind of combat sometimes, I hope is for other folks listening, ventilating or like opening for folks. Like if you are feeling like, oh God, I do that a lot. I did think of things that way. That's okay. Everyone is where they are in their journey of life and trying to figure out how we connect with other human beings. And hopefully that we just learn more and more in a helpful way as time progresses. And I hope tonight is one of those experiences for folks. So I've said it many times, but I think it really bears repeating that it's brave of the folks on the panel to just share, missteps, mistakes, and how y'all have been able to move on and eventually do better. And I think that can be inspiration and guide for other folks. Amanda, do we have time for one more question?
Yeah, I think if we share quick.
Okay, great.
We'll be quick. Anna will hold me accountable and I'll hold her accountable.
I've forbidden myself from ever saying, yeah, quick story. I don't do that anymore because I know it's never happened ever in my life.
We're in the Midwest, so it doesn't happen for us either.
I'm in good company then, huh?
Yeah.
This is maybe less about like missteps, but more towards some other sort of like challenges that we face in doing our best to support people in the best way we can. And the like reality is that, a lot of young folks whose way of interacting, communicating is being social with folks is different than the sort of neuronormative expectations that exist in our society currently. For these folks, whether it's school or family or community, they are likely going to find themselves having to sort of confront that other people don't understand them, that Anna and Megan and Amanda aren't always right by to translate and try to offer a new perspective and do their best to help them feel really understood. And I'm not trying to frame this as a what about the big bad world thing, but it's just a reality. And so I'm curious what folks think about what like supportive message do you think of sending to young people about just how to think about or be in these unwelcoming environments that they're probably going to find themselves in at some time or other? How do we do some piece to help them prepare themselves for those situations?
I'm going to jump in on this one.
You go.
Because so I know my son's going through a really hard time sticking with some of these things that he now thinks are babyish, right? I don't need social stories or comic stripping. And I don't need Five is Against the Law. I don't need these things. I don't even need to meet with Anna anymore. Like, I'm done. I'm a high schooler. I'm going to be driving. I'm too cool for school. The thing is that he masks hard. And he's at an age when he's really trying to, like, he's doing great with friends. He's doing really good in school, but at a really heavy cost to his energy as a human. And we see it show up in lots of different ways that have heavy costs for just his mental health and his well-being. And I think what I want him to learn about, even when this stuff feels like to him, he's just like, no, I'm successful. See all these ways that I'm successful? I want him to continue with these things because these are the ways that help him learn his independent voice so that when he's ready to show more of who he really is, and I'm not there or Anna's not there, he will feel confident to do that and show who he really is. And those tools will just be there. It's like practicing breathing when you're calm, so that when you're not calm and stressed, the skills are always there. So it's that, to me, is like the most powerful thing I can do for him if he's good at math, he's good at math. That's fine. I don't even care. I don't need him to be a straight A student. I need him. I feel the best thing I can do for him as a mom is make sure that he's mentally well, that he's a balanced, healthy person. The other stuff will come. Like what he's going to do in life, whether he's an engineer or works at wherever, I don't care. Just as long as he's healthy and happy with whatever he's doing. And so to me, it's this kind of stuff that is the most important. And he's going through, like, adolescence is so tough that I think it's really persevering, whether it kills me. There are days it feels like it's gonna, really helping him stick to this stuff.
Yeah, I think for me, it's when I'm meeting with students, like explaining to them that they have the most important voice at the table, and that if they're in a space that people aren't listening to them, that they need to listen to those. Like I think interoception and Kelly Maher's work and all of that is like so amazing and critical to everything we're doing, because if you can't feel those, if you can't notice those red flag feelings, like when you're around someone and you've got that feeling in your stomach or your hands are getting, that means you need a support, and it's okay to ask for it. Because I think students have been often in such a compliance based, there's just been so much focus on compliance, and trying to undo that so that young adults or kids at a young age even can start to see that their voice matters and their advocacy matters. And if they're not in a place where people are listening, that they need to keep looking, that there are adults who want to help and there are adults who will listen. And that it's really important that people listen to them and hear and work on that advocacy. And that if there are things that they want to learn in terms of social skills so that they can participate on the wrestling team, or they can go, like that you can drive those, that you are the driver of of our targets and our interventions, and just kind of giving them a voice and reminding them that they have a voice and that their voice is really important. And like Amanda said, catching yourself sometimes, like when a student says something and it's wrong, or it feels wrong, or like socially it's gonna get them in a tricky spot, and not doing the like or you've got to fix, but that just letting them be and letting them drive and getting curious with them about what's going on and what they're thinking. So just really reminding kids that they're the most, like, what do you want the adults to know? Like you can drive this and people will listen. And if they're not, we have to keep looking.
Yeah, I kind of talked this one through with Anna because I was like, gosh, where do we start? Right. And I just keep thinking about, like, Mr. Rogers, like, look for the helpers, right? Like reminding our students, reminding the people we work with about, like, you get to be the driver of that destiny, right? Like you are your best indicator, and I'm going to show you what it looks like to be a great advocate. I'm going to show you what it looks like to presume competence. I'm going to show you what it looks like to ask for consent and seek your opinion and gather your thoughts, right? So that you can begin to notice in the world around you where the other helpers are, right? And so I think just thinking about how you present yourself on a day-to-day, how you continue to show up, and reminding it's important to me to have your voice at the table, right? Like I will sit here and listen and understand or ask or seek clarity. And so just pointing out some of those qualities so that when it doesn't feel good, or it's not going their way, or there's something more to be said, or it's a really tricky conversation to be had, that they know who and how to surround themselves at that table to be able to do it, or to start to build those qualities within themselves so that they can advocate when that time inevitably comes, because it will. And the more we notice, the more we take note of things that aren't okay, the more we interrupt that discord. I mean, to just show, like, there are helpers out there and you'll be able to find them when the time comes.
Yeah, that's really lovely. That's really lovely. Thank you for sharing that. It is a loaded question, and you're right to check in with each other to be like, oh my God, where do we start? And especially how do we make this a brief response, tall order for a question like that. No, I appreciate everyone's response about that. That's maybe one of the hardest questions is, we'll do our part when we're around, and how do we validate and recognize, and then that next step, or the thing we want to ultimately prepare people for is like, when we're not around, what can we do now to prepare folks for when folks like us are not around, right? Great. Well, thank you. Those are the questions we had for the panel. Do we want to open up to Q&A? I also want to check Amanda or Jen or Jenna if we needed to do the survey wrap up piece too. I didn't put that up yet.
Let's do the post session poll for now, and then let's do maybe stop recording, Amanda, now, or no? When do we stop recording? I forgot when I'm recording. I think you know.
I'm on mute. Go ahead. I'm unmuted. Please go ahead and stop the recording. I've launched the poll. Please feel free to